The week in Texas politics began with the end of a special session, and it ended with the start of a new fight over elections. Today, Fox 7 Austin's Rudy Koski and a panel of political analysts discussed the political fallout from the week.
Here we are back in the LBJ penthouse talking about another week in Texas politics. And with us now are our group of analysts. And we'll start off with Patrick Svitek with the Texas Tribune. Patrick, what's your headline for the week?
Yeah, I think, still the lingering uncertainty over whether there will be a fourth special session.
Mark Wiggins, political consultant, what's your headline for the week?
I think the big headlines are, I think we're all glad for an end to the Squid Game legislative session. Everyone's been beaten and bloodied, and for the survivors, the big headline is going to be, what happens next? This is where the dominoes begin to fall.
Stephen Dial with Fox 4, what's your headline for the week?
Jordan Sweet, special session's finally over, but with a question mark.
Brian Smith with St. Edward's University, your headline for the week.
Constitutional amendments, important but boring.
So Patrick, let's go back and take a look at those issues. What strikes you about those?
Yeah, I think the new Secretary of State is a huge story. As you pointed out, Abbott, as has been the custom for him, appointed the Secretary of State at a time when he can maximize the time between the appointment and when the Senate has to confirm the appointment. So this guy is not going to have to be confirmed by the Senate, presumably for a while. And one of the things that jumped out immediately in his background was that he was briefly represented the Trump campaign in one of their lawsuits challenging the election results in 2020 in a battleground state. That's obviously, a part of his resume that senators are going to have questions about.
Stephen, if there's not a special session, is this going to be all about the primaries for the next several weeks?
Definitely, and in particular for Governor Abbott and his front view, kind of bouncing off what Patrick said, is, whether the governor says it or not, a lot of these decisions or some of these decisions are with 22 in mind, trying to fend off some of his more conservative opponents that he's going to be facing. And then in his rearview mirror is 2024.
Brian, from a historical point of view, with what we're seeing right now, is this the most partisan that you've seen?
But this is the most partisan we've seen since the Republicans have taken over the House and Senate here in the state of Texas, the legislature. Lots of red meat issues, like Stephen was saying, and not a lot of good blood coming out of this for either party.
Mark, what are you hearing underneath the dome right now? Is there a sense of relief, or is there just more anxiety?
Yeah, I think everyone is relieved to be done with this legislative session. I mean, folks have been in the Capitol now for the past 10 months. I don't think that there is I think there's a fear in the back of everyone's mind that we could come back. But, looking at the likelihood of a fourth special session, I think there's very little upside for the governor. And the governor really doesn't have the cudgel of the legislative budget or the constitutionally mandated redistricting to hold over everyone's heads now. But on the other hand, the governor has shown he's very easily moved by the lieutenant governor's positions and by Don Huffines, who's running against the governor in the primary. And the joke in Austin right now is, if you want to know what's on the governor's agenda, just read Don Huffines' latest press release.
If the session is over, do we go back into the focusing on mandates with masks and vaccines?
Patrick? I think we'll have to see what the COVID numbers look like. They've been on the decline in recent weeks, but, they could spike again. They could increase again. And we're going to be in the same situation where Abbott is forced to take executive action or forced to deal with calls for more executive action or giving more power to local authorities, which he's resisted so far. And so, I can't predict. I'm not an epidemiologist. I don't know exactly where the pandemic is going. But, I think if we do end up in a situation where numbers are spiking again, we're going to see a very familiar news cycle where Abbott is pressured to take more, more aggressive statewide action or give more power to local authorities. And everything we've, seen so far, at least politically, suggests that he's going to resist that.
I'm wondering if we're going to see these massive sites, if the federal government is going to send resources again, or is it going to be, hey, you find the shot somewhere and keep it moving?
I think this one is not as big of a political battle as getting the people who are right now resistant to the vaccine, the adults who are more contagious, more likely to die, to try to get them vaccinated.
And, I think the big picture is that all of this is going to play out against the context of the 2022 elections.
And with that, let's wrap up the week with one word. Patrick, we'll start with you. What's your one word for the week?
2020, because John Scott's nomination to be Secretary of State reminded me how much of our politics in Texas is still relitigating 2020 in some way.
Stephen Dial, what's your one word for the week?
Midterms.
Brian Smith, your word for the week.
Gerrymandering.
And Mark Wiggins, your word for the week.
We're Signy dead.
And with that, we wrap up another week in Texas politics.